For decades, cars have remained pretty much the same. 4 tires, an engine, and a driver. But a handful of companies, such as Tesla and Google, are working hard to take the driver out of the equation with autonomous vehicles. So, what does a future with driverless cars mean for infrastructure, public transit, and urban sprawl? Let's ask Stephen Del Duca. He's the Minister of Transportation in Ontario and the Liberal MPP for Vaughan. Philippe Christ, economist and administrator at the International Transport Forum of the OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Cherise Burda, executive director of Ryerson University's City Building Institute. And Stephen Buckley, general manager for transportation services for the City of Toronto. And I'm happy to welcome all 4 of you here to TVO. We're going to have a discussion. You know what? They can't do these TV programs, thankfully, autonomously without a host. We're not there yet. Yet. But apparently, driverless cars are coming. Take a look at the monitors in here, because some people are not yet thrilled with the notion of autonomous vehicles. Roll tape.
Oh, there's cars coming! Oh, there's cars! Ah! Bill, just put me back for me control it. Oh, dear, I could never.
Yes, there will be a bit of an adjustment as we try to figure out driving, letting somebody else do the driving. Anyway, let's follow up that with, here's the Toronto Star's Oliver Satkow, who wrote this. It's 7:20 a.m. on a Monday in the not-too-distant future. You wake up and you realize you've overslept. It's a 2-hour commute to work. So you call your boss and you tell her you'll start working on the way. A quick shower and what hardly qualifies as breakfast, and you're out the door. There's no car in your driveway. You realize you forgot to order one. A quick tap on your phone, and 2 minutes later, an empty car drives up. You get in and pull out your laptop. For the next 2 hours, you're immersed in work as your car takes you to the office. Once you arrive, you'll order another car to pick up your kids, who've hopefully woken up by now, and drive them to school. Another car will pick them up and drive them home in time to have dinner with you. This is a day in a very possible future in Toronto. The technology that will get us there, driverless cars, is already starting to change how we live. Philippe, you've come the furthest, so I want to ask you first.
All right.
How accurate is that future?
Well, I think it's certainly one of the many possible futures. If there's a 2-hour, I'll say one thing, if there's a 2-hour commute, that's probably, we haven't achieved the potential of automated vehicle driving. Because one thing that we can see is that with the arrival of these technologies, we can have a much more efficient use of the city space. Some of the work that we've done looking at how these systems could potentially roll out, this is one scenario, there are other scenarios as well, we could see a dramatic reduction in the number of vehicles used in the city and a dramatic reduction in the amount of travel in the city. Now that is a good scenario. I think the City of Toronto has worked on some of these types of scenarios as well, but there are also dystopian scenarios that are possible where people use cars very much like they own and use cars today, except without the driver. And these are the scenarios where you have the dog being driven to the vet, where you have the children, like we heard, being driven to school. I think that we have to keep in mind that as we see these technologies roll out on the ground, everything else will be changing at the same time. And so it's unrealistic to expect that we will just have a self-driving vehicle used much as we do today. This type of scenario, I think, is probably more likely. But there are even greater, more optimistic scenarios.
Which we'll get into over the course of our discussion. This feels, Cherise, very far in the future. So why do we need to be talking about it now?
Well, I think that we need to be getting ahead of this and planning and asking the questions of how do we make this technology help us, make our cities better, rather than simply letting this technology happen to us. And so moving forward from what Philippe was saying, another scenario for this type of technology is not that it provides the opportunity for people to live further and further away and drive more, but maybe it could be used to fill some of the gaps we have in our transportation system. So for example, we talk a lot about serving the last mile. What happens when
what does that refer to, the last mile?
When the sort of the transit station or the GO station, you can't really get to your home or to your office from there. Maybe there's a slow bus, but maybe you have to park at the GO station. So these types of technologies could fill up those transportation gaps and actually help boost ridership and take cars off the road.
Stephen, how much is the City of Toronto thinking about what AVs, autonomous vehicles, might do to the future?
So we started looking at this about 18 months ago, and Barry Kirk, who's sort of a known Canadian expert on this, came in to speak to many city divisions on the issue. And so we're preparing basically to look at we don't know what the future is going to look like. So we engaged the University of Toronto to prepare a white paper for us. And in there, we sort of outlined 2 potential futures. And one is autonomous vehicles, similar to the current model, that are all privately owned by individuals. A second model that we see coming forward in companies like Google and Uber and those sorts of companies is transportation as a service or a shared mobility model. And you could think of them perhaps as robo-taxis. If we go one way or the other, it could have very different outcomes for cities. So that's the sort of piece that we want to really get our heads around. What we likely see, though, is that probably both of these models will move forward over the next decade or so.
Let me ask Stephen Del Duca, because you've got the province-wide perspective on this. You've made billions of dollars worth of announcements for public transit. We know there are highway constructions going on. How much might autonomous vehicles affect all of the announcements that you've made?
I think there's no doubt that there's potential there for a significant disruption as we go forward, especially given what we've just heard here so far with the start of this conversation. I do think, though, that the infrastructure investments we're making in transit and transportation, particularly in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, are crucial because there's a significant catch-up that we are involved in right now because of chronic years of underinvestment, or a number of years of underinvestment. Having said that, part of my mandate, part of my responsibility was to advance this particular issue, the notion of automated vehicles. We are now the first province in Canada that permits the testing of automated vehicles on our roads and highways.
When's that going to happen?
Well, it's already in effect right now. So theoretically right now, any entity that qualifies could apply to the Ministry of Transportation and could be testing their technology on our roads and highways within certain considerations that are given with respect to safety, for example. And we've had a ton of interest and excitement from both the auto sector and our educational research institutions. And I expect that we'll see participants in this pilot in the near future. But it helps demonstrate Ontario within the Canadian context as leading. Again, first province in Canada to do this. A number of states south of the border are already doing it. We want to make sure that we are there at the table with respect to transportation, but also with respect to economic development and luring investment to help create jobs in this future going forward.
Okay, let's dive deeper into some of the other issues that AVs raise, starting with ownership, because, well, certainly I'm of a generation where as soon as you turn 16, one of the things you wanted to do was get your license on day one and then buy a car as soon as possible after that. Whether we're potentially looking at a future where car ownership is really not that same kind of priority is one of the things we need to discuss. The notion of a car as freedom. How are we going to get people out of the mindset that autonomous vehicles represent something completely different on that front?
Right. Well, I think that it's changing already. We've seen that a lot of millennials are choosing to live in cities where they can walk, where they can take transit, they can ride their bikes. And as seniors are getting older, they don't want to be isolated when it's more difficult to drive. So we're starting to build our neighborhoods and our communities so that they're more intensified. We need to think about how this type of technology can help achieve those goals of more intensification, more walkable communities, more transit, and how things like AVs and shared AVs can support that. And I would say that in the younger generation and even in my older generation, I see freedom as not having to own a car and take care of it and park it and think about it. It's such a pain. I would much rather have alternatives that are simpler.
It's an interesting and different frame, Philippe, because of course most of our cars sit in parking lots or our driveways for 23 hours a day or 22 hours a day and do absolutely nothing at all. But this notion of a car as freedom, of a car as something we own, to have freedom, how do we change that mindset?
Well, let's keep in mind that if most cars are used less than 50 minutes a day, and people still buy cars, it's because cars provide a lot of convenience. People are willing to overinvest in a car in order to have it accessible when they need it. And before, that was the only way you could have access to a car, is actually to own it or to have a family friend or a family member who owns it. Now we're not in that world anymore. We're in a world where you can access a car just like you would access a bus, like you would access a metro. You go to it, you call it, it comes to you, right now with a driver, maybe later without a driver. And what Therese was saying about cities is that increasingly people in cities are finding it as easy to live without a car as with a car. And in that world, then the automated vehicle becomes more an object that is a utilitarian object that is used for when we want that type of transport service, as opposed to taking a bike share, as opposed to walking, as opposed to taking the train. But the one area where I think this type of technology will be very disruptive will be in lower density bus services. And I think we have to think about, how this type of shared or not, self-driving vehicle technology can be a new form and part of a new way of accessing public transportation.
Before we go there, I do want to get the minister in on this, because you represent Vaughan, which is one of those 905
Proudly,
ridings.
yes.
How many homes on your street?
12, I believe, yeah.
How many cars in those 12 homes?
More than 12, I would say somewhere between 25 and 30.
So most people, I mean, this is a typical thing, who live in the suburbs,
but-
they've got 2 or 3 cars per family, 2 or 3 car garages. Can you imagine your constituents being prepared not to own cars, but to sort of share ownership or go AVs?
I mean, I can at a certain point, but to the original question we were just talking about on this point, I think that we sometimes, for the best of intentions, we get stuck very much on that everybody in our society makes rational choices. I think we can't afford to ignore that some of what we're talking about is emotional, some of it is historic, some of it is cultural. I mean, cultural in the broadest sense of the word. So I think we have to take into account that we will go through a transitional period as we're having this debate, as government at all levels is sorting through how we're going to get to the outcomes that we're looking for. I am an optimist. I think there definitely is potential there, but fundamentally, there has to be a value proposition that exists both rationally and also somewhat emotionally, so that people can make the choices that will produce those better outcomes.
Stephen, I wonder how concerned you are that if the scenario that Philippe described earlier, where if it's so easy not to own a car and they'll just show up within a couple of minutes whenever you want them, that the already jam-packed roads in the 416 capital city of this province will be even more packed.
Well, I don't think we see AVs supplanting the large line haul transit in the cities. I think that's always going to be there. That's always going to be the backbone of what we need. I think much of as we get fewer and fewer human drivers on the road, the efficiency of these vehicles gets much better as well. Right now, humans have to keep 2 seconds apart as they drive. These things can be a half second apart. So you can literally quadruple capacity on the same number of lanes if you needed to. Now, I don't think that's the future necessarily we want, but I think you're going to be able to squeeze more out of roads once we get beyond a phase of, and I can imagine, at some point, you may need a license to be permitted to drive. I mean, ultimately, I think we'd like to get to a world where we took humans out of driving. I mean, 90% of auto collisions are human error. So at that point, I view this out of the gate. One of the key benefits out of the gate is about protecting the safety of those in the vehicle, and more importantly, those outside of the vehicle.
I hadn't planned to talk about this today, but 90% of accidents on the roads are human error.
Correct.
Can you imagine how much less business our trauma units at hospitals are going to get? Can you imagine the insurance industry? I mean, the implications there are massive.
Absolutely. And I think we'd all agree that that would be a good economic outcome. So.
Good enough. Charisse, how much concern do you have that AVs are going to bring more traffic to the city as opposed to less?
Again, I think it's how we deploy them and how we make our choices now in terms of, are we going to just allow them to be all privately owned and have more vehicles on the road? Or do we want to look at how to integrate them into our transportation system? And I think we can already get started on that. There are cities throughout North America that are working with Lyft and Uber to integrate them into their transit network so that they are helping to serve that last mile and they are helping to fill those gaps in transportation. And it's actually boosting ridership and it's reducing cars on the road. And I think it's a good first start. And then you blend the automated component of that ride sharing together for the full deployment of automated vehicles.
We talked about, Minister, the potential impact on the public transit announcements that you've been making, these AVs. But what about, for example, I know the City of Toronto is looking at spending $1 billion to move one interchange of the Gardiner Expressway about, 1 or 2 kilometers down the road? I mean,
1.7.
1.7 kilometers down the road. In a world of AVs, does that expenditure look even dumber than some people already think it is?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to comment on specific decisions that our municipal partners have made. I think again, here in this region, and I say this as a lifelong resident of the GTHA, I think we do have a profound responsibility to deal with the catch-up issue because of the underinvestment that we've experienced. But I think we also have to be open-minded. We have to be innovative. I know the province of Ontario is taking that approach with respect to this technology as it blends with the more traditional public transit infrastructure investments and transportation infrastructure investments that we're making, and I have every expectation that our municipal partners will follow with respect to that balanced approach. We can't presume that a future, as ideal as that might be for all of us, which is likely still a few years away, will solve all of our problems, and that we can just sort of surrender and not deal with the existing challenges that we have.
You've looked at examples all around the world of how other cities are trying to struggle with all of these issues. What are you finding?
Well, the first thing we find is there's a tremendous amount of angst out there. There's a lot of uncertainty about investments. There's a lot of uncertainty about future travel demand projections that the investments depend on. A lot of people are really anxious. Government officials, public authorities are anxious. And I think the first advice we give them is that if you're looking at long-term capital investments and long-term planning issues, then you should already be taking into account the potential impacts of AV technology on the one hand, but you should also be looking at what's happening with transportation network companies, the Lyfts, the Didi Quadis, the Ola Cabs of the world, because they too will have an impact on your long.
I haven't heard of half those things you just mentioned. What are all
So
those
transportation, so Uber and Lyft, basically.
Yeah.
But Uber and Lyft are just two of hundreds of companies around the world, and in some cases not the primary companies. Didi Xuqing in China is the Chinese Uber, if you will. And those companies are having a tremendous impact on travel demand, because especially in those countries where motorization rates are going up high, this allows people to have access to a car without ever having to own one. So take into account the potential impacts of automated vehicles, take into account the potential impact of new mobility services when you start thinking about, do I need this investment for 10, 20, 15, 30 years down the line? And I think the city of Toronto is doing that. And in North America, there aren't that many cities that are doing that. There are other cities outside of North America that make that part of their fundamental planning process.
Name names. Who's hip to this right now?
So right now, name names. We can look at London, for example, the transportation for London, the city of Stockholm. I'm not going to give another Swedish, but Göteborg in Sweden is doing it. The city of Berlin is doing it. Paris is just starting to do it. Singapore has been involved with this type of thinking about future investments for a long time. What we find is that the cities that have the greatest constraints in terms of space available for new infrastructure, the cities that have the greatest constraints in terms of overuse of roads are the ones that are going to act first. And I think that means that you'll probably see some innovation coming from some of the most traffic-heavy cities in the world.
Let's take a look at, check the monitors out here. We want to put these photos up. Sheldon, this is City Mobile 2. Let's bring these photos up. It's a pilot project for an automated transport system taking place in several cities around Europe. Okay, Philippe, what are we looking at?
I've actually ridden in that. This is a City Mobile 2. It's a automated track-based, so it goes only on a specific route. It's in a number of cities. I just rode in it a week and a half ago in Stockholm. It's also present in Lausanne, Switzerland at the Swiss Polytechnical University. It is an idea of how future public transport could operate in terms of smaller vehicles. This one isn't on demand. It follows a set route. And I have to be honest, it's not a tremendous experience because it is quite slow, it's stop and go. But it does show that the potential, at least for self-driving, is something that will not just be for private cars, it'll be something that you'll also see in forms of quasi-public transport.
Are there drivers in those things?
There are no drivers. Well, there's a student in the ETH one in Lausanne, and there's a person from the Stockholm Public Transport Authority that is in there, able to take over with a gamepad. I mean, they don't have actually an access to a steering wheel or an accelerator, and they can take control if they need to. I think the type of technologies that we see here, the self-driving vehicles that we see on the roads in North America and other places as well, those will be more likely the type of vehicles that we'll first see deployed in this sort of Uber scenario, this Lyft scenario, this transportation network company scenario, where in order to provide those type of services, they will have driverless cars. And we know already from the public announcements that GM and Lyft are going to do this. We know that Uber has invested heavily into this. We think that Google's business plan operates a little bit on that. We're fairly certain that Apple, when they develop their self-driving vehicle, will have this component of a self-driving robo-taxi fleet. We know that Baidu in China is doing the same thing. Everywhere, people are thinking about the first deployment of these vehicles, large-scale deployment, in fleets.
Stephen Del Duca, can you imagine those things on our roads?
I mean, again, I'm optimistic about the future potential as long as all of the partners involved, including government, are deploying the policy levers that we have at our disposal to make sure we get the outcome that we're looking for. I mean, Charisse mentioned earlier the announcement that the province of Ontario made earlier this week around the growth plan update. And our desire to see us move forward in a certain way. To me, that is part of picking a lane, looking at this technology, embracing it, but also making sure that we're deploying it in a way that makes sense because of the needs that we have here in this province or that we have here in Toronto or in this region. That's the responsibility that, again, falls to us collectively to work on. And it's exciting that we're doing it, but I am optimistic that we can achieve the positive change that we're looking for.
Charisse, can you see these things on our roads? those little mini
Absolutely.
buses or whatever. What do you call them? Mini buses?
City Mobile. This is a brand, City Mobile.
Oh, so, okay. You imagine that happening?
Definitely. I think also, but I do think we need to get our planning right first. So I think that we need to start with an understanding of what we want our future to look like, our built form, our land use plan first, and then decide the type of transportation network, the deployment of these technologies in order to achieve these goals, rather than trying to sort of run along beside it and try and figure out our built form as we're deploying these types of technologies and that they're coming in at all directions. How can these technologies service those complete communities? How can they help people get from point A to point B, fill in those transportation gaps, and help to support those more low-density parts of our region that aren't served well by transit, and where you can't simply, by economics, deploy a bus fleet all over the place to serve that low-density type of form.
Stephen Buckley, I don't know if the city has a view on this, and I think you're actually not responsible for the Toronto Transit Commission at
I'm
all.
not.
You're not. Having said that, so our transit in all the cities, frankly, in Ontario, it's all public transit right now. Can you imagine a future where these things operate and it's all private?
Yeah. I think there's probably, I mean, some of my conversations with folks in the transit industry, not just TTC, folks are in a little bit of denial about this, about it occurring. And my thing is, I think we want to sort of test these. We want to make them safe. We want to make them sort of dependable. Public acceptance, as we mentioned, is going to depend very much on local culture. I mean, you can envision in a city like San Francisco or downtown Toronto, you're probably going to see a greater willingness to sort of participate in something such as an autonomous vehicle, where if you go to sort of more rural areas, you might sort of have more of a cultural resistance to it. So I think that it's going to come, and I think that transit agencies need to start thinking about it at a minimum.
Philippe?
Yeah, I'd just like to add, because we've looked at the detailed impacts of these type of systems. In a system where you have, let's call them robo-taxis, in a system where you have minibuses, taxi buses, if you will, in a system where you have heavy-duty rail, we see a reduction of 97% of the vehicles required to deliver all the same trips in the city as today. That's a massive reduction in the number of vehicles, a 20% increase in the amount of curb-to-curb space that you can have access to in the city, because you don't need surface parking at all.
Where is that happening?
Now, this has been done for Lisbon. We're doing the work for 5 other cities now, and we're also engaging with London to do it for a much larger city.
You think it's possible to reduce the number of cars on the road by 97%?
This is a modeling exercise, so this isn't reality. But what our modeling shows us is that all in, once the system is fully implemented in this way, and I don't expect it will be implemented in this way in many cities, at least not in the initial term, you can see these massive impacts. And the other thing is that if you design the system well with a proper dispatching algorithm that controls when trips are being picked up and when they're being delivered, you can see a 30% reduction in travel. And that means a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions with existing technologies, not with electric vehicles, but with existing internal combustion engine technologies. So the potential is really, really big, and I think that's why it's interesting for cities to start looking, how do we go this way rather than this way? And I think the point of the transition is a definite issue for cities, because the management of that transition is going to be the key issue. It's a governance issue.
I know you're all optimists here, and the minister keeps telling us he is, so having said that, so my job is to be the killjoy here, and I want to just sort of put this on the table and get some discussion about this. Stephen Del Duca, to you first. Your job, I guess, as Minister of Transportation is to be aware of what's going on the roads, on the highways, public transit, and so on, bike lanes, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
I wonder if an autonomous vehicle future, where it's so easy to have these things show up at your house in 2 minutes, to take the kids to school, to take the dog to the vet, whatever, means that people will avail themselves of the ease of that. They won't bike as much, they won't walk as much. The whole idea about becoming a healthier society is therefore not going to happen. What do you think?
Well, I mean, look, I said earlier there are policy levers that all levels of government have to deploy, should they choose to deploy them. I think we have to, again, demonstrate what that value proposition is to people who live in this region, people who live in the province, and choose to use the policy levers that will help, again, achieve that outcome that you're looking for. I think that's really important. This is not one of those situations where I think we can afford to simply sit back and wait and be reactionary as we see things taking place in other jurisdictions. I think we have to literally decide what we want our future to look like. I've said in the past, picking that lane. We've got to pick the lane, or we've got to pick the road, and whichever transportation pun we want to use, we have to do that. We have to define the outcome, set the policy objectives, and then drive hard towards those objectives. And you see some of that right now, City of Toronto, Province of Ontario, other municipalities in the region But we also have to be able to demonstrate to those that we represent at a political level that there is a value in what we are predicting can occur for them, for their families, their neighbors, their businesses. And so it's there. It can be done. Of that, I have no doubt. We just have to have the political will. This government, I think, in Ontario does have that political will. Our premier does. We just have to press ahead and help make it happen.
This is TVO, Minister. No commercials allowed, okay? We move on here. Charisse, what about it? Are more people likely to use these AVs rather than walk and bike? And wouldn't that be an ironic negative impact?
I don't think so. I think you're just going to have more mobility choices that all work together. And what you might see, hopefully, if you do it right and you have it so it's more shared ownership, so that it's supporting transit, you may have more cars or less cars on the road, like Philippe explained. And in that case, you can actually free up some of that space that's being dedicated to parking lots, that's being dedicated to road infrastructure, that can be liberated and reimagined for parks, for the public realm, more housing choices, things like that, more bike lanes, more pedestrian-friendly spaces to walk in. So it might actually help get more people out there walking and cycling. And I think one of the things we see every day in the city, which is very disturbing, is how many pedestrians and cyclists are killed every single day by cars. And I would guess that a lot of it is due to distracted driving. So let people be in their cars on their phones and not have to worry about taking the wheel as well.
Let me follow up with the minister on that. The GO Transit obviously has a ton of parking spots all over the GTA. Can you imagine a future, and again, I guess a lot of this is blue skying, but can we imagine a future where if people don't actually need to have their car sitting in a GO Transit parking lot for 23 hours a day, or whatever, that there will be an entirely different use of all of those parking lots and all of that space?
Yeah, that certainly can be. I mean, GO Transit is the single largest parking authority in Canada, somewhere in the neighborhood of 75,000 parking spaces, with more on the horizon to be built because we have more service coming onto our corridors. But I think at the end of the day, there is definitely a chance to reduce the reliance, assuming that we can get some of these pieces right. Charisse talked earlier about the last mile, last mile connection. That's a huge piece here. And there is no doubt that this technology can play a positive role with respect to delivering, again, that outcome. But we have to know how we want to deploy it. We have to have the courage to do it and withstand some of the challenges along the way. The other thing I'll mention, here in this region, as we build public transit infrastructure through built-up areas, City of Toronto, my home community, others, we experience how disruptive it is when we're doing it after the fact, how expensive it is, how painful it is for people who live in these neighborhoods because we're building transit after the fact. But as we continue to build more communities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, taking into account what this technology can do, it seems to me that it's only common sense to say if there are things we need to build or embed in our infrastructure as we're building these communities that will serve to deliver on this outcome, it will be cheaper, it will be less disruptive as we're building the communities instead of doing what we've historically done, which is built up a city, built up a neighborhood, and then forced transportation or transit solutions in after the fact. It's got to be a better way for us to do that, and I think some of the opportunity rests in this technology.
What did you call them? You've got that expression?
Transit-inspired communities.
Transit-inspired communities, as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about, I mean, again, if you look all over the 416, there are Green Pea parking lots everywhere. The city's got its share of parking spaces. If you didn't have to have thousands upon thousands of spots to put cars to sit idle all day long, have you begun to reimagine how that space might be used?
Yeah, no, so this is the Toronto Parking Authority oversees that. But ultimately, I think they're viewing it as I think they're a little nervous that demand could go down over the next decade or so. If that is the case, though, they do have space in many probably of the highest real estate valued areas throughout the city. And again, it's just revisiting what that site's used for. I probably would say that economically, by generating revenue, it may be the highest and best use, but it may not be the highest and best use from a city building standpoint.
Gotcha. In our remaining moments here, let me read this from a special edition of The Economist magazine, which is called What If? Sheldon, if you would. Car lovers will doubtless mourn the passing of machines that, in the 20th century, became icons of personal freedom. But this freedom is illusory. The empty roads seen in car advertisements are not most people's experience of driving. In a driverless future, people will come to wonder why they tolerated such a high rate of road deaths and why they spent so much money on machines that mostly sat unused. A world of self-driving vehicles may sound odd, but coming generations will consider the era of car ownership to have been much stranger. Cherise, you buying that?
Perhaps. I think that a lot of it comes down to the model, really. If it's everybody owns a driverless vehicle, then we're not going to get away from what we're seeing in terms of the congestion and the long commutes. If there is more of a shared model, then we are going to see a complete transformation. And we are going to be able to put our people first and our neighborhoods first and make sure that we are building those complete communities, transforming GO stations right now, which are going to become mobility hubs for communities. And right now, if you look at how they're designed, entire neighborhoods have their backs turned on the station, and it's parking lots. We need to look inward to the GO station. They need to be part of a complete neighborhood. So we need to be building complete communities where these cars help to service that.
You know, Philippe, when I was a kid, we used to drive down the highways, and if you'd just gone to a drive-in restaurant, you opened up the window when you were done your meal and you threw all the litter, out the window,
Yeah.
and we've kind of learned that that's not cool anymore.
Not cool.
Can you imagine?
Way not cool.
Way not cool. Can you imagine a future where the notion of car ownership would seem quaint and kind of silly?
You're asking the wrong person, because I'm 50 years old. I've never owned a car. I don't even have a driver's license.
Come on, really?
I grew up in Tennessee. So if I can do it, then anyone can do it.
You've really never had a
I've
driver's
never had a
license?
driver's license. And now, of course, I live in Paris. But one of the good things about where I live, and one of the great things about Toronto, is that these cities are cities where it is becoming as easy to live without a car as with a car, because you have choices. And one of the choices is coming down the road. And just like we heard there, one of the choices I think that will be most liberating will be the arrival of these technologies. I can't wait for the day when I can access a car like we heard the economists describing. And my daughters already don't value having a car. We just, this afternoon, have to go find them 2 iPhones, and we're getting them iPhones. They don't want to drive, they want to have this phone. We asked them, do you want driver's lessons for your permit, or do you want this for your birthday? They want the iPhone.
That was an easy choice.
That was not for me, because now I'm going to go all over Toronto and try to find them.
Gotcha.
No,
Steve.
no, I was going to say, I think this is a generational thing. Liberation, as you said back when you were young, was a car. That was the way you got to your friends and connected with your friends. Nowadays, it's the device. They don't need to physically be in the proximity. And I think, ultimately what we want to do is we want to look back and say, what are the goals of the city, and how do we want the city to develop? And then again, back to the simple question, don't let the technological tail wag the dog here. Think about how we can use this to help build the cities that we want to see.
I totally hear you, but let's also recognize that I suspect you, and I know you, and I know you, and I live in, we live in a big city. You don't. And I wonder, well...
Big-ish city.
It's a big-ish
Getting there, we're
city,
getting
okay.
there.
It's a big-ish
Getting
city.
a subway.
Yeah.
But I do wonder whether people, for example, who live in the 905 and,
Yeah.
and obviously in more remote parts of the province are going to feel kind of as bullish about this as everybody else seems to.
I would say people living in the 905 are thirsting for solutions to help, because they know we have to find a way to do better. Because the quality of life impact on the gridlock delivers to all of us is not something that's particularly popular. I think there might be some skepticism to a degree in the 905, but they really do want to see a solution. So it goes back to, what is that value proposition for people who live in the 905? If we can demonstrate that they can use technology, that on demand they can access some way to get to a GO station or to a subway station or somewhere else as part of their destination and not have to be stuck endlessly in traffic on regional roads or highways, I think they would embrace it. I think it'll take some time. There is a transitional period that will have to occur, but the future is exciting.
It always is. I want to thank our guests for coming from near and far to be with us today. Stephen Del Duca, the Minister of Transportation, and Cerise Berta from Ryerson University City Building Institute, and on the other side of the table, Stephen Buckley from the City of Toronto, and Philippe Christ, sort of Parisian, sort of from Nashville.
Crazy.
I'm still trying to figure out that accent. Anyway, it's just occurred to me as well, we've had more Steves per square inch on this discussion than I think any other program we've done, but it's not a terrible thing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.